Do you have a story or message that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story and or message? If so, it might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform that I love and use, Riverside. Riverside makes it super easy to start a podcast built for growth from day one. With 4K video recording or from your phone, iPad or browser of choice, and AI editing that cuts down editing time by removing unwanted background noises, filler words like ums, as, and many other speech patterns, and the ability to turn every single episode into social clips. Riverside makes it super easy to start a podcast that sounds great. Ready to share your story and message with the world? Check out the link in the show note description to learn more about Riverside and use code Luke Borrows my name to get a 15% discount off a paid subscription. Now, let's turn our attention to this episode, where in this episode, we're joined by Paula Carnell, who is a bee expert, podcaster, speaker, and author, to discuss all things bees and their relationship with human health. Be prepared to learn how what's killing bees is also killing us humans, the spiritual and life lessons that we can take from our little friends, the history of bees and bee products, and so much more. This was a fascinating conversation that I got to have with Paula, where I learned so much about bees and their role in not just our ecosystem, we get to learn a little bit of that in school, but in improving the direction and trajectory of human health. And I'm now excited to be able to share it with you. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Paula, welcome to Raising Consciousness. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, and I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Very excited to have you. First question, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, I'm Paula Carnell. I am a bee and honey expert and a honey sommelier, and I work as a consultant helping people sustainably keep and manage bees, but all species, not just honeybees. And I also have my own podcast called Creating a Buzz About Health.
Why do you do what you do?
Well, it's a calling. I was originally an artist. I had a 20-year career as an artist, and then I fell ill, seriously ill, when I was 40, with a genetic condition. So I was bed and wheelchair bound for 7 years, and I was told I'd never walk again and I'd be dead by 50, and there was no treatment. And even to this day, I don't know anybody else who has fully recovered or hasn't publicly announced that they fully recovered. And I did fully recover through bees, herbal medicine, and plant-based minerals. So my work now is helping people understand the connection between bee health and human health. So I see bees as the canary in the coal mine. I know that what's killing the bees is also killing us. And so I'm on a mission just to help raise that consciousness, raise that awareness.
Why does your work matter?
Well, I think that as human beings, well, as part of nature, not on top of it or outside of it, all of nature is communicating all of the time. And humans seem to have switched off our receiver for connecting with nature. And I feel our receiver is our intuition, our gut intuition. And you're probably aware that all around us, we're seeing things to do with bees. Everybody's worrying about bees. And I see bees as that connection between the heavens and humanities. And they're really trying to raise our consciousness so that we can save both the bees and all of nature and ourselves, and raise to a higher vibration, and help raise humanity. So I feel I'm one of the chosen group of people who are increasingly growing at the moment, who have a message to share, and I share the wisdom of the bees. So it does matter, because we're not very good at listening to the wisdom of other humans, or the wisdom of the trees or the water or anything else. So I think that's why there's so many of us around the world who are sharing wisdom from all different aspects of nature. And people will listen to the voice that resonates. And so, yeah, I'm sharing the frequencies and the resonance of the bees to whoever will listen.
Well, I'm definitely listening. I'm very curious by your work. What do you most people misunderstand about bees?
Most people think of bees as being one type of bee and that they all make honey. and they think of them as an insect that is just out to sting you and harm. The other thing people think about honeybees is that they are the most important pollinators, and they're not. And that is what I try and help people understand, is that there's 22,000 species of bees, but only 11 species make honey. And what I'm learning from the work I'm doing here now, I'm doing a project in the middle of an Indian Ocean, a little coral atoll of 27 islands. And what I'm seeing is that when bees are in a pristine environment and when there's plenty of nectar and pollen, that the honey they produce really is a surplus. So bees do need nectar, which they then convert into honey. But in the West, particularly in Northern Europe, where I'm from, in England, the bees, they collect honey, which they store to feed themselves through the winter months when there is no nectar. What I'm noticing here is that because there's an abundance of nectar all year round, the bees don't touch the honey. So it makes honey really is a medicine for humans. They are producing it to help give us medicine and healing. So that just, for me, is such a big understanding about bees and why bees are dying, where they're dying, and what we can do to help them.
And so let's touch on, because obviously you mentioned there one bee product, honey. Obviously there's a few others as well. What health benefits does bee products have for our health, and did that help? And it sounded like from your story that bee products helped you to heal what you were going through. And that's that question with a little bit of a voice in the back of my mind of some sectors within in health stigmatizing honey because basically they say it's sugar, right? And so and carbohydrates and like the big thing around that. So what role does bee products play in human health?
Oh gosh, there's many layers. So yes, honey, starting with honey isn't the same as the sugar that you buy in a bag in the shop. So honey is made up of about 180 different compounds. So it has lots of complex sugars, and the sugars come from the plants that the bees take the nectar from. And the key difference is how the human body processes sugar. If you have a table sugar, it goes into your body, liver and kidneys, they all get affected. They're all trying to work together to process the sugar so that we can absorb it. And because we eat more sugar than we need, it then gets stored in the fat of your liver. So for an example, if you go to bed and you wake up in the night, quite often you wake up in the night because your brain is starved of sugars, of carbohydrate. It needs the fuel to run it. And so what we do is we wake up because we have to kickstart the kidney to process stored sugar, which is in our fat, to feed our brain. Now, because honey has already been processed by the bees, it goes straight to your brain. So a teaspoon of honey will actually sustain you for 24 hours. So you're not going to wake up hungry in the middle of the night. And because it's not just one type of sugar, it's many types of sugars, it really benefits all parts of your bodies. And the key thing about honey is the trace element. So we can break down all the different parts of sugar, of the honey, into its different sugars. And, like you said, it's carbohydrate. But sometimes the most powerful ingredients are the tiniest. So the trace elements that the bees will absorb through the nectar that has come through the plants, and the plants have taken those trace elements from the soil of wherever they grow, that can be some of the most powerful ingredients in honey. But also, as the bees process honey, they're adding the bacteria from their guts, and they add a special amino acid which helps break down the sugar particles. And so that's what really makes honey so different. So it really is not sugar. It is sugars, but just like the sugars in an apple is very different to, the sugar in, as a processed bag of sugar, honey is different again. So honey is very important like that. Now, I was taking honey because it does help with your immune system. It's an overall booster of your immune system. And my immune system was really struggling with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So having honey was helping me not be so sensitive to, other pollens, or any kind of allergens like dust and the various things that we do find we get allergic to. So honey will boost that. But I think looking back, I've been well for 8 years now, and the more I'm learning about frequencies and energies, I can see that it's as much that helped me heal, the frequency of the bees and being in their presence and working with bees, as taking honey or taking propolis. So it's not like with any health recovery. It's not, there is no magic pill. We heal ourselves, but we have to surround ourselves with the environment and the terrain that will enable our body to heal. And the plant-based minerals, the honey, the bees' presence, the herbal medicine, these were all ingredients that help my body to recover its health.
And does quality matter?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So honey, just because it says honey on the jar does not mean it is honey. I actually watched a video last night from a German organization of beekeepers who have tested 80 samples from supermarkets across Europe. No, hundreds of samples of honey across Europe, and 80% of them were adulterated. And so what's happening now is you have this massive industry of manipulating sugars to replicate honey so they can pass the rigorous tests that we have for honey. And so they're passing these tests. And so legally it's labeled honey, and all the laboratories are going, yes, it's actually passed the test because it's got the signatures that we look for in honey. But when honey sensory analysts like myself taste it, and now with the DNA profiling, we can find that it is adulterated honey. It's sugar syrup. And so when you're buying honey and it's too cheap, then that is a good indicator that it's not actually honey. And so you're not going to get any of the health benefits from that. And this is very damaging on many levels, not only on your health because you're eating honey that isn't honey, but also for beekeepers, because beekeepers can no longer afford to run a business as a bee farmer. Just like many farmers growing food, it's no longer cost effective because there's cheaper synthetic alternatives available in supermarkets, which the consumer, trusting the supermarkets, is buying, and it's not viable. Beekeepers and other farmers can't afford to continue the care that is required to produce a high quality product. So it's very challenging out there now for people who are not aware to make sure that they're eating good quality food, let alone good quality honey.
And so do the manufacturers take the original honey and then just process it down so much it just becomes like syrup? Or do they just create something from scratch and just whack honey on the label? Do you have insights into the process?
It's a combination of the two. So they can take a small amount of honey, dilute it down with water or rice syrup or sugar syrup. But now with synthetic and genetic modification, they're able to actually make a completely synthetic product that will replicate some of the characteristics that you would expect of honey. So it might look like honey and it would have the viscosity of honey, the color of honey, but it actually, the real properties are, it just isn't honey.
So for consumers like myself, what do we look out for when we go into the shop to actually buy the real stuff?
Well, the first thing is try and buy from a beekeeper. That's and a beekeeper you can trust. So a farmer's market would be a good bet. Now, on the labeling of honey, it should have one country of origin. Well, that will give you an idea that it is more likely to be honey, because what happens is honey is blended. Honey is sold all around the world in big barrels, and then to get the consistency that they believe the consumer likes, so either a runny honey that won't crystallize or maybe a creamy honey, and the color, all of these things, they'll literally blend all the honey from all around the world or sugar syrups, and then they will make this product that they think consumers will like. Whereas when you get honey straight from the hive and from a beekeeper, there's no guarantee what color it'll be. There's no guarantee what consistency it will be. And naturally it will crystallize when it comes out of the hive. That is a natural process where if you have particles of pollen in the honey, which you will have if it's a natural product, the sugar, the glucose in the honey will actually form crystals around the particles of pollen. And so that's a perfectly natural process. And different plants will have a different balance of sugar, glucose, and fructose. So the three main sugars. So things like dandelion honey have a really high glucose level, and rapeseed honey as well. And so they're more likely to crystallize and set. So the first thing is to check that you're buying from a beekeeper. Now, with my work, I am much more conscious and interested in the spiritual energetics of bees. And within beekeeping itself, there's different layers of quality. And it's very controversial because the main beekeeping associations are training beekeepers to keep bees in a certain way, which we now know, and scientists have got all the evidence for this, that it is not beneficial for bees. There's a scientist called Peter Neumann from Bern University, and his great quote is that the biggest risk to bees is beekeepers. And that sounds crazy because you think beekeepers are these lovely people that are very natural and working with the bees. However, because of the pressure of producing honey and having healthy bees, there's a lot of pressure for beekeepers to put chemicals inside the beehives. And of course, those chemicals will they're mainly there to kill parasites or viruses that bees have, but you're going to get residues of that in the honey. And some of these chemicals are very damaging, and they are actually damaging the bees. So you're trying to kill an insect on an insect, so you're going to have some collateral damage. So the next level is you want to know that you're buying honey that doesn't have chemicals in it. And that's very, very difficult because in many countries, it's illegal to keep bees and not treat them for disease. So, we have this whole other layer. But I do speak at conferences, scientific conferences, and, I talk to the scientists and they're like, we've got to stop putting these chemicals in the hives because the bees, it's weakening their immune systems and they're getting sick. So there's a lot of conditions that bees are suffering from that are very similar to conditions that humans are suffering from. So for me, I can see that they really are the canaries in the coal mine. And if we're going to breed bees for massive honey production, but not for health, there's going to be a consequence. And that's what we're seeing at the moment is sick bees, poor quality honey. Yeah, it's quite a crisis situation.
Like humans, I guess, and the state of kind of human health, right? So just on that point, so what are some alternatives instead of using the chemicals that you recommend or use, or just like allow nature to take its natural course? What's your approach?
Okay, so there is a great belief amongst the conventional beekeepers that natural beekeepers are lazy beekeepers, so that we're just leaving our bees wild and then they're going to swarm and they'll sting everybody and, you'll get angry bees. And that's not the case. If you're a natural beekeeper, it actually takes more time because you're doing a lot more observations. So with conventional beekeeping, you would open your hive every week, you're lifting up the frames, you're looking to see if the queen's there, you're looking to see if she's laying eggs. You might be looking for disease, and then you'll be taking all the honey and you'll take it when the bees have the maximum amount of honey. Now, the problem with that is that you're not really observing the patterns of the bees over a longer period of time. So there's simple things that natural beekeepers can do. The first one is that you only use your native bees. So if you want to have honeybees, don't go and buy a packet of bees or import them from another country. You literally position a hive and attract a local swarm, which will happen if you do it at the right time of year. Also, bees are attracted to certain environments like humans and certain frequencies. So what I do is I douse the land where people want bees, and I know of the energetic frequencies that the bees are going to be attracted to. So that's where I'm going to put a hive, and then you're sort of 99% sure you're going to get a swarm move into that. Then you want to really observe your bees, and if they have been naturalized to your environment, they are going to know all the plants and what time of year they will produce nectar and pollen. And the bees need both. They need the nectar for carbohydrate and to turn into honey, but they need the pollen as the protein, which they need to feed their young. And there's a scientist in Belgrade University, a bee scientist, who's a queen rearer, and he rears natural queens. Slajan, a dear friend of mine, lovely chap. And he explained to me that queen bees have a different dialect. So if you have bees in Somerset and bees in Yorkshire, because bees only travel in a 5-mile radius, they really know their environment really, really well. Now, if Yorkshire beekeepers were going to start buying my queens and I'd send my queens up to Yorkshire, just like if I sent myself up to Yorkshire, I'm going to have a different accent. And there's going to be some problems in communication. There might be odd words or phrases that I would use that they wouldn't understand, and vice versa. And so you're actually going to set back the communication within your hive a few months, which can be life-threatening for a colony. So if you send a queen from Somerset up to Yorkshire, it's going to take her too long to adapt. You're going to have too short a period for the bees to understand what's growing in the environment. So bees need to emerge, and you have this collective consciousness with bees. They have what a wonderful beekeeper called Willie Robson up in Northumberland says is a corporate memory. So bees only live for 6 weeks. So when a bee leaves the hive after 3 weeks of age and she starts foraging for nectar and pollen, she'll come back to the hive. And when she's found a source of nectar and pollen, she'll do a dance. And that dance gives the exact location of where that pollen is or that nectar is. And she will also have calculated how many bees are needed to forage from it, what time of day the nectar or pollen is going to be available, and how long for. And then how many bees are going to be needed inside the hive. Now, if that colony have been in that environment for ages, that information is going to be really quick. They're going to understand it really quickly because they'll go, oh, yeah, I remember a story of sunflowers in that area last year, or lavender or lime trees. Now, she will do a dance, but that bee will be dead in 3 weeks' time because they only live for 6 weeks. So it's no good if she shares that information a couple of days before she dies and the colony don't remember that information. So they hold that memory. This is that corporate memory, so that for generations on, any information that comes into the hive is stored. So this is why it's so important that we don't mess about with our native colonies. The other thing is that if you bring in bees, you're going to upset the native pollinator balance. And because in Britain we have 275 species of bees and only one of them is a honeybee, if you bring in a colony of honeybees from, say, Yorkshire to Somerset, you're going to add 50,000 more hungry mouths that need feeding in your garden. And if you haven't planted more flowers to allow for that extra input of hungry bees, you're going to starve out your native bees, which are the most important pollinators. So it's really important that you don't move bees around. But because we have been moving bees around, and because of our monocultures, where you have an orchard that is perhaps sprayed to keep all the insects off, we have now lost the native pollinators, which would be a mining bee, that would pollinate those apples quicker and more effectively than the honeybees. So where one a red mason bee is the main pollinator for apples in Britain, and one red mason bee can do the pollination work of between 100 and 250 honeybees. But if you spray that orchard, you kill off those bees. So then you become dependent on the honeybees to pollinate, and they're not as effective, because the honeybees, what they're meant to do is collect the honey as medicine for humans. They're not meant to be buzzing around just pollinating our food. We've got all the bumblebees, all the different solitary bees that have all evolved over millions of years to pollinate specific foods. So we really have messed things up. And what I've understand from the work I'm doing here is just how starving honeybees are in Britain, because they're eating the honey that they store for the winter, and they're dependent on that. And what we really have got to do to save the bees in Europe is plant more flowers. We need to restore the wildflower meadows that we've lost and really have that diversity so bees do have enough food to produce surplus honey. So as a natural beekeeper, you're much more aware of your whole wider environment, and you're much more conscious of the health and well-being of your bees. So you're making sure that they've got a variety of foods to forage from. You're making sure that they do produce and collect propolis, which is the bee's skin. It's their antibacterial, antiviral, antiseptic magic ingredient. So all the things that bees are bred out, like the propolis production, and stinging and all these things, these are what you need to have healthy bees. So as a natural beekeeper, you're working with nature rather than trying to work against it and produce more honey just for humans.
What's then the consequences of that for human health?
Well, it's a win-win, because if you have more biodiversity, we can grow more food. And if we stop using the chemicals on the way we grow our food, not only will it stop killing all the different insects, but it will stop making us sick as well. Because a lot of these chemicals that are used are actually nerve agents, and they upset the bees by their inability to switch off. So when you have a bee that's been exposed to a toxic environment, so say bees go to a big field of crops that have been sprayed, or worse still, have had the neonicotinoids, so a treated seed use, which makes the whole plant, is called a systemic pesticide, so it makes the whole plant toxic. These nerve agents prevent the bees' nerve receptors from closing. So we all have, around our cells, we have these little receptors, which are like a little cup, and you have a nerve impulse, which could be, lift your arm. You get that impulse, will go to the receptor will receive the impulse, and then it will close and send that electrical pulse around as a piece of information. Now, if you have a nerve agent, which these systemic pesticides are, it prevents these receptors from closing. So what happens is that the cells are constantly bombarded with information. And what happens to the bees then is they are unable to rest. So you'll have bees that are exhibiting unsocial behavior. They are no longer able to connect as a superorganism. Their lifespan is shortened by 50%, and you'll see bees outside a hive shaking like this because they're having so many nerve impulses, and they shake like that till they die. Now, what's really shocking is we've known this for 20 odd years with bees, well, in fact, even longer than that. And that's what beekeepers and bee scientists have been doing to try and stop the use of these pesticides. But my question is, why can't people see that these are the symptoms humans are getting, and we're being told it's a genetic condition or a genetic illness that you're destined to get, or it's now just being diagnosed? But actually, if you're eating food that has got these nerve agents on, that's causing the effects on any insect that is interacting with these foods, then obviously that's what's creating sickness and disease within humans. So the bees really are the canary in the coal mine. And if we do watch the bees and learn from them, and instead of thinking, oh, when the bees are dead, let's just replace them with robotic bees, or let's just keep breeding more, it's asking the question, why are the bees dying? And, that's the really big question. And when we can answer that, then we can start addressing why humans are dying too.
So 2 questions. The first question is, what are some alternatives to the chemicals that are sprayed kind of on our foods that more natural chemicals, maybe not natural chemicals, but more natural solutions maybe. First question. And then second question is, building on that, what else can we learn from bees when it comes to human health?
Okay, so regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, biodynamic agriculture, these are all ways that are working with nature and removing the dependence and the use of chemicals. So instead of having an orchard with 50,000 trees in, you actually start thinking, well, let's have some of these plants, and then we'll have companion planting. So there's a wonderful film called The Biggest Little Farm. I think it was an American film, and they've done 2 of them now. And it was just such a lovely story, because it's where a family in America bought a farm as a dream, and it was just a dust bowl where a conventional farmer had been. They'd exhausted the soil and then moved on. So there was just nothing but dust. and they decided to do regenerative agriculture. And so things were planted in spirals, and it was all this companion planting. And it wasn't easy. But after 4 or 5 years, they could go to farmers markets. And whereas other farmers would have, oh, this is our crop of pears, or this is our crop of corn, they would say, well, we've got a small crop of pumpkins, we've got a small crop of sunflowers, we've got a small crop of fruit. And it was all seasonal and companion planting. So then when you'd have a disaster, so there were really major storms, and all the neighbours, they had all their soil washed away because there was nothing holding the soil into the ground. Because they had a variety of things planted, they would lose some crops, but other crops would thrive. And their soil was actually stronger and could withhold and manage storms and extreme weather conditions. So that is really important for us. So there are ways of changing our food. Now, there's a big argument that, oh, we need to have this chemical agriculture because we've got this massive population and we have to feed everybody. But actually, we're overeating, which is obvious to most people to see. But also, we are wasting a third of our food. Over a third of our food in the Western Hemisphere is just being thrown away. But also, we're not getting the nutrition we need from the food because there's no nutrition in that food because the soil is dead. So when you start eating really good nutritional food and it's nutrient dense and mineral dense, you don't need to eat as much because your body is satisfied. It's got what it needs. But when you eat some food that is, very, not much difference between eating a sheet of paper, really, your body is still hungry because you haven't had any of the nutrients. And so then we overeat. And sugar will keep sort of satisfying those cravings and give us a bit of fuel, but it's a short fix. So for human health, if we have this more biodiverse environment, that will really help for all of us, for our health. And so we would have, instead of having this, we get pests and diseases that sort of come through and they're, like swarms of locusts or swarms of wasps. You'll get these invasive species, and because nature is trying to reset that balance. Now we have to go through quite a difficult transition because the pendulum has swung so far the wrong way that we're going to have to swing right to the other way, where you need the wasps to clean up all the disease and to clean up all the sick insects. And then the pendulum will swing back down to the middle and you'll start seeing more diverse insect life. And that's what we need. It is that biodiversity. So it's not about which bee do we save. We have to save all of them. And we have to save the wasps. And we have to save the ladybirds. And we have to save the beetles and the spiders and the flies, because they all have a part to play. And it's the same with humanity. You can't say, well, let's just save a certain race of humanity. We have to have everything because everybody fits together for wisdom for the different parts of the world they live in. And we need that wisdom and we need to all work together. So this is what we can learn from the bees. The bees are teaching us it's not just about the honeybees. It's about 22,000 species of bees that have spent 150 million years to understand what their role is in the world. And we've just come in and thought, oh, well, let's just not worry about all those bees. Let's just worry about the honeybees because we get honey from them. It's disastrous.
I would just like to take a quick pause and break to mention Well Easy. Well Easy is an online members shop on a mission to making healthy living easy, affordable, and accessible to everyone. With up to 35% off our favorite health food brands and only the highest quality organic products available for every diet or lifestyle, I highly recommend Well Easy to be one of the places that you stop and shop. The great news is that you can buy your bee products directly from Well Easy, which goes through their rigorous testing and extensive criteria to ensure that you get the highest quality products every time. Get started with Well Easy today and pick up your favorite bee product or any other bee product for that matter of fact by going to the link in the show note description and using code REALLOOP10. That's using code REALLOOP10 for £10 off orders over £50 and receive a free 30-day trial. Now, let's get back to today's episode. We'll touch on the history of bees actually, because I've got some questions around that. But based on what you were sharing there, do you have hope? And that question comes from like this kind of notion in my mind of like industrial agriculture being so huge, and as you alluded to there, kind of people saying that we need to kind of feed everyone, and just like the industrial agriculture, I guess, that actually changing the tide, as you alluded to, is going to be a challenge. And so I'm just wondering if you are hopeful, if you do see change or not, I guess.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this. I mean, I've been thinking about that question for a number of years, probably most of my life. But the last few years, I've come to a stage where, and I'm now able to speak publicly about it. For a long time, I thought, oh, how do I put this into words? And people will think I'm crazy. But what was happening is that people contact me from all over the world if they see dead bees. And I work with projects all over the world. And when I work in my way, I get to see lots more bees. So you start going into a land and there's not many bees. And by the time we've done our work, there's loads of bees because we've changed the planting and we've changed the energy of the land, and we've worked with nature. I also believe the more you look, the more you find. If you start caring about bees and looking for them, you are going to see more bees. But it did challenge me that so many people who were also doing good work were seeing dead bees. And in my little world, my bubble, I was just seeing more and more bees. So I started to think, well, how can this be? And I started to see, particularly over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of division in humanity and in the world. And I could see that we're having two types of realities. We're having this sort of dystopian future with no hope, which is moving everyone into cities and everyone being controlled. And it's a real 1984 scenario. And I was at school doing my O-levels in 1984 and got to watch the film, and we were all filled with doom and gloom, but hoping it would never happen. And now, you see more and more of that as a reality, with sort of Big Brother watching you and control and manipulation and horrible grey cities and no insects. So I can see that future, and it is playing out in some places. But what is so exciting is you also have a lot of people who are going, I'm refusing to accept that as my reality or as my future. And what they're doing is creating regenerative farm. They're creating pockets, great communities. People are really working together with health, with food growing, with businesses, circular economies. And we're seeing that happening as well. So you've got this sort of natural divide. So a few years ago, I was thinking, right, you're going to have a natural divide. And thinking in a very practical, three-dimensional reality, I was thinking what will happen is you'll get this tipping point where people living in dark grey cities under Big Brother are going to be getting sick, and they will see these wonderful green utopian places and start thinking, actually, I think I will go that way now. But now, the way I see it is connected to bees. I have been sort of looking into this 3, 4th, and 5th dimensional perception of reality. And the 3rd dimension perception of reality, which we've all been existing in, is very much that everything is separate and we're outside of nature, we're outside of each other, there's no cohesiveness, there's no connection. And that is the reality we've lived in. That was the last industrial revolution. And so the progress of that is more power, more control, more death and destruction, and actually exploiting nature, not seeing nature as a living organism, and that we're just sat on top of it. And because within that 3-dimensional reality, there tends not to be any faith or any hope. So when you die, it's all gone and nothing matters. So it enables people, it gives people permission to be destructive because there's no consequence. Then a 4th dimensional reality or perception of reality is when people start to think, oh, there's this evil force that's doing this 3-dimensional thing, and they're so bad and we're so good, and there's still that separation, and there's a big case of judgment. It's like they're bad, I'm good, Now the 5th dimension or perception of reality is that we are all one, we're all connected, and there is no good or evil, there just is, and I am and it is. And I think bees are already there. Bees are 5th dimensional embodiments of that perception of reality. And so bees have chosen to come from that reality to be in the third dimension of reality and just die, just sacrifice themselves, mass suicide, to wake people up, to go, this is what happens when you have this massive disconnection. And so by following the path of the bees die out, and you'll have proportions of people that will ask questions, why are they dying? Well, let's go on this other path. And then you go through that path of judgment and separation and awakeningness. And then eventually you come to that fifth dimension where you realize we have choice, we have hope, we create our own realities, and we're just following the bees. And so I do feel there's more and more people who have got one foot in fifth and one foot in third and straddling the middle. And it's a journey we need to go through. Not everyone will go through it. Not everyone wants to go through it. And that's absolutely fine, because it is what it is. But that's what gives me hope, is I am actively working to bring as many people as possible with me to a fifth dimensional perception of reality, which I can see. And here I am on this tropical island in the middle of the Indian Ocean that I was brought here from a dream. It's ended up being hugely challenging, but also another layer of self-development through healing traumas, which we need to do to get to that stage where we can be in that that oneness, in that place of oneness. And what I've understand from here is it appears to be paradise, and people come here for a week of paradise, but it has all the problems that everyone has all around the world. Everything dark and miserable and horrible is also happening here. There are massive threats. There's a threat for the island to sink under climate change, with the waters coming in. There's plastic being washed up on the beaches. There's the threat of a military airport, and so becoming the next Diego Garcia, and all the people here having to move off. I'm here with an Islamic community, and then across the water you've got a Western community. So you've got all those frictions of culture. I don't know if you can hear the call to prayer going on now in the background. So you've got all those problems, but also you have got this incredible beauty and power of nature. We have the most incredible shades of blue. You can see 20 shades of blue and turquoise in the water here. The sky is clear and blue. We have the sunshine. We have crazy Wi-Fi, because apparently we're under some kind of meridian, which means even the most powerful satellite networks drop out. So if I drop out, that's it. The trees here are hugely medicinal. We've got calophyllum trees, which are anti-carcinogenic. The bees are thriving, and we've got wild bees, and they're producing honey all the time. So I really feel that the more of us all around the world who can embody a more fifth dimensional process and perception of reality, that will be these bubbles of hope that will resonate out. So when people come here and stay with us, and they can forget all the wars in the world, and they can forget all the troubles, but they can really drink in beauty of nature at its best and most powerful. And being surrounded by this water, the consciousness of the water is absorbing our uplifted vibration, carrying that outward, and then that in turn will raise the vibration of humanity. So, I was brought here by bees. I've ended up having to do a lot more trauma work, but the bees help with trauma. So now we're helping heal the traumas of the past, because people were brought here as slaves 200 years ago. So it's, there's plenty of trauma here. And it's wonderful. So I have so much hope. And I mean, it does help just not watching the news, just being present, just really being present, and being the best human being I can be every moment of every day, and being grateful for what nature provides. And the more grateful you are, the more nature provides. So yeah, I'm really, really hopeful.
Yeah, so just some thoughts on that. We'd love to kind of run by you, I guess. So kind of the first thing was, how does one, if they are living in more like of a Western civilization, Western culture, and the challenges that faces, move to more of a fifth dimension? Because let's just say not everyone maybe straight away can get up and go to a beautiful island, and so, because I kind of feel myself, like, as you said, sometimes like in between the two, like been doing a lot of spiritual growth work and understanding the concept of like actually life isn't, and the events in life aren't even good or bad. It's just what is. And this kind of concept of what is, and that what is. But then sometimes looking out the window and just kind of seeing the civilization that I'm kind of Western culture that I'm in. I guess in all of the challenges that faces. And then that kind of alludes me to when you were then talking about the bees, in terms of, one, why would they leave the fifth dimension to come into the third dimension to sacrifice themselves for us? That was something else that went through my mind. And then the third thing was, is it because like bees don't have, or from kind of what I understand, like humans obviously have like our intellect, right? We have like the ego and kind of the intellect, etc. So does that um does that quote unquote, for want of a better word, make us kind of judge things as good or bad, and not live in the present moment so much? And that actually one of the solutions to this is actually training ourselves to be in the present moment more, and that can help us get to the fifth dimension. So a lot of things there. Feel free to like pick up on anything I said, but those were some of the question and thoughts that I had around when you were talking about the fifth dimension and bees.
Okay. So if we look at a colony of bees, there's 50,000 in a colony. You'll have one queen, 49,000 female bees, and a few hundred male bees. And we look at it from a human perspective and think the queen rules the hive, but she doesn't. It is a true democracy. So every decision that every bee makes is for the good of the whole, not just for the good of that one colony, but for the good of the species and for the good of the environment. So that explains why bees will come from a perfect place of, fifth dimensional reality to come back to try and wake us up. And so that makes sense. And this is why a bee will sting you and it will die. So we can't comprehend that. We would think, why would somebody, why would anything want to sting you knowing it's going to lose its life? Well, because that's for the better of the whole, because they will see a human's electrical field. And if you think every cell in your body is resonating at a frequency, and that will create a note. So we're like a walking orchestra. But if you have a sick cell, it's going to be a duff note. So you're an orchestra with like a really squeaky violin playing. And each of those frequencies will give you your aura, your electrical field. And bees can see that. So if you're walking around and you're very present and you're very healthy, the bees can see that you're a healthy being. They don't need to get involved and they'll just carry on about their business. But if they see a duff note and a bit of dodgy colouring that says that you've got something out of frequency, they're going to go, oh, they need healing. And they will sting you on the meridian that will fix that imbalance. And that is worth, because a healthy human being can then, once you've got your health, you can do anything. When you have no health, you can do nothing. So this is, again, part of my journey was, to lose all my health to such an extreme state, so that when you have your health, you become fearless and much more empowered and much more aware of the importance of the health for everybody. Because so many people are just teetering, a month before a chronic condition, and when you are chronically sick, it's going to take you a month of really active healing for every year that you've been sick. So sometimes, it can take 40 years. It took me 40 years to become chronically sick. So it was a long time to get myself better again. So you have to look at it not from a human perspective, but from a bee's perspective. So bees are happy to sacrifice themselves, because what is the point? If you have a perception of everything being one and everything being a perfect fit and connecting together, if something is harmful, something is out of balance, that affects the whole one. And at the moment, you've got some humans coming through to fifth dimensional reality, but we're dragging other humans who are not healthy, who are not at the right vibration. And so the bees are thinking, we've got to go back and fix this. So that's one way of looking at it. Then what can we do? Now, I've only been here 5 months, so I'm not somebody of privilege. I gave up I've still got my business in the UK. I am still trying to run that business. I'm completely self-funded. And when I came here, part of my growth was for everything to collapse. So I could feel the traumas of the islands. I could feel the trauma of the history, and all my income stopped. Everything was flowing to get me here. Then I got here and I had to go through another crisis to ask for help, because I've always had my own business. I've always been independent. And suddenly my next growth is I have to ask for help. I have to collaborate. So I collaborated with a lady called Catherine Veer, who energetically heals properties and land. So we worked together, and then that could take me up to the next level and heal all these traumas. But when I was in England, I was already thinking this stuff. That was how I could follow this calling to come here. And what you do is you just, like you said, you just become more present. There's so many clues in being. Bees are present. The frequency of bees is 256 hertz, which is the frequency of being present. It's presence, it's neutrality. The frequency before that is courage. So you need to go through that frequency of having the courage to be a bit different, to not follow the crowd, and to go, actually, I'm going to stop now and smell this rose because I want to be present. I'm actually going to be late for that meeting because I need to be present with this person who's just telling me their trauma. It is actually living moment to moment to moment. And the more you do that, the more your life will become more present, and that will lift you. And when it comes to watching the news, well, for a start, just don't watch the news. But if you have things that are upsetting, that are going on, and the news will seep in, you will know about what's going on in the world, and you will have tragedies going on around you. But you need to stand back and observe. And if you look at it from a perspective of we are all one, you feel the pain of the people who are being blown up. You feel the pain of the people that feel they have to blow up other people, because we are all one, and hurt people hurt people. So you can't separate. You can't say that, there's a different race who are evil. We've all got that potential in us, but the consequences and the choices we make take us on a different path. So it's looking at evil things that happen and thinking, well, what would happen to somebody to make them able to create atrocities? And then what can I do to make sure that other people don't get into those situations? And if we persecute people because of their color, because of their wealth or lack of wealth, their poverty, their religion, we are in effect affecting ourselves. Because if you deprive people of food, of a living, of a job, of a roof, of any of the basic human needs, you're going to push them into a position where they are going to have to fight for survival. And fighting for survival can mean theft, it can mean murder, it can mean, all kinds of things that you can't imagine if you are in a present state. So it's really understanding that whatever you think about someone, whatever judgment you have, and if something is triggering you, it's because there's a part of you that has not yet been addressed or healed that you are ignoring. We have to get to a stage where we admit that we have done bad things, we've had bad thoughts, we have judgments. And when you can get to a stage where you no longer judge, you will no longer be judged, and your existence will carry on, that you won't be put into situations where you will have those kind of conflicts. So it's not an easy ride. It's really challenging. And, the first 3 months here, I was nearly broken. My husband was nearly broken. We were like, we've got to come back. How can we deal with this? It's so hard. And that's where compassion comes in, because not everyone is going to be able to do that journey. And that's where we need compassion, because they're all part of the puzzle. And so people will leave this existence through death, through murder, through awful different ways, because it's not their soul's purpose to progress this time. But we need them. They're sacrificing, just like the bee will sacrifice its individuality for the good of the whole, to help heal a human. And we need to be more like bees and understand that death is just part of the cycle. And when you can no longer fear the death of the individual, be it the individual ego or the individual physical body, then you can start being really courageous and start changing the world. And it is that letting go of the ego and understanding why was the ego there to start with, and it's to protect the individual. But we don't need to protect the individual because we're not individuals, we're all part of the whole. And so, it makes sense when it makes sense, and you just have to do it a step at a time and just do what you can do. And if you don't want to be killing bees, just stop buying chemically grown food. Don't fight governments or signing petitions. There is a place for them, but why not just take a little bit of action and just stop feeding money to the organizations that you don't agree with? And that is really direct action. So it is being the change you want to see and really being it. I mean, a few years ago, well, 6 years ago, I got a van with my name all over it for my bee business. And because I was so public about eating organic food, I had to become even more conscious that my van could not be seen outside a supermarket or anywhere that I didn't condone. And it wasn't that I was going to supermarkets, but I suddenly became really conscious that I couldn't even slip back every now and again. Or if my kids wanted a lift to go and buy some cheap food, it's like, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to condone that activity, So it really is being who you want to be, and starting with those small things. It's that having no more skeletons in your cupboard. It's being completely transparent about all aspects of your life, being vulnerable, and then there's no place for the ego.
I love that, and it kind of brings up to me that actually, it's like the example you gave there with your van. It's like in that situation is actually the demonstration of the things that you believe in and your values, and having the courage, when linking it back to courage, to like push through and stand up for what you believe in that coming out, for one of a better phrase, like in your actions and actually what you do. A couple of things I did want to touch on before we finish our conversation today. The first was the history of bees, because I think I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how, I think it was the Egyptians, like utilized honey and like all these other bee products as well. And I just found that fascinating. And in the same podcast, they were saying how actually honey is like nature's sweetener, right? And then it kind of links back to what we were talking way in the beginning of the conversation, that people fear honey, even though like it's nature's natural sweetener, right? And so I don't fear honey. I love it, and kind of is the sweetener that I go to. So I want to touch on that, because I think, as I alluded to beforehand, a lot of people fear honey, but when we kind of actually see it as one, nature's sweetener, but also two, it's been utilized for thousands of years. And that's one of my principles with health overall, is to do the things that humans have been doing the longest, right? Because it's we're still here, we're still alive, and so something, that innate wisdom within us is kept us going. So what, in like a potted version, what is the history of of bees and kind of bee products?
Well, bees have been revered in just about every culture. They've been studied for over 4,000 years. So this is why it's so great with their health, that they've only recently started showing certain health conditions. So we know it's environmental. The Egyptians really did revere honey, bees, and they would use royal jelly, they would use the honey. And so they could see that bees were the connection between the heavens and humanity. Now, one of the reasons I'm here on this island with the Muslim community is in the Quran. There's a whole chapter called the Bee, where Allah had given his wisdom to Muhammad about the bees, and how that was then meant to be passed on to humans through the bees. And there's a quote in there that says, go and put the hives in the mountains, in the trees, and where they choose, and from their bellies emerges a fluid of diverse colours, which is healing for the people. And then it says, surely in this there's a sign for those who reflect. So if you reflect about why is honey different colours, you then start to think, oh, it's because it's come from different plants. And as a medical herbalist, you know that different plants have different medicinal properties. So the bees are just connecting all of that. And with that fear of honey, there's that fear that you can't give honey to babies if they're under a year old. Well, indigenous people and ancient people always gave babies honey. They would put it on their skin for nappy rash or, sores. It would help them sleep. It's always been used. But in Western society now, we have this absolute fear of any kind of bacteria or virus. And because honey is live, it's got all these different living organisms in it from the bees. There is that fear. But there's also that very, very tiny risk of botulism because the bees are taking the nectar from plants and because it's not been heated, which would stop this certain bacteria. My take on it, I mean, my boys are all grown up now, but if I was to have a baby now, I would give it honey from my hives because I know it is real honey and I wouldn't think twice about it. However, if you're buying honey, you don't know what's in that honey. And so I wouldn't give it to children because you don't know what's in it. And if it's a blend and it's come from all different countries, then and it's not even honey, if it's sugar, I wouldn't give sugar to babies. That's far more harmful than honey. And then that fear, the only thing to fear is fear itself, as Roosevelt said, and that's, again, that goes back to my O-level years in history. And that's something that's always resonated with me, that fear is something that when you can lose fear, you can start to live. And we are taught and encouraged to be fearful for so many things, but then you need to look at who's telling you to be fearful and what is their alternative. And normally somebody's earning money from your fear. So yeah, really, really have a look at that. And we have to, again, reconnect with nature, with our intuition, and stop thinking that other people are making us sick or making us healthy, and start taking full responsibility for all aspects of our lives, for our wealth, our well-being, our health. And then when we start taking full responsibility, you can start experimenting, but then you have to lose that fear of the consequences. Yes, you might eat, there's all kinds of weird plants here that I'm tempted to chew on, but there's a plant here with little black berries that looks exactly like elderberries. Now, elderberries are toxic in the UK if you eat them unheated, and maybe that's why people here are saying, oh no, you can't eat those, they're poisonous. But I am wondering, well, what if you cook them? So I do need to do a bit more research on that. I'm not going to go and eat those berries because they could be anything. So it is that taking that self-responsibility, doing your own research, and then, letting go of the fear of the risks and the consequences. Whether you live once or 100 times, you need to embrace it. And indigenous people, ancient people, they loved their honey. And Britain was the honey lands. People used to travel, get the honey from Britain. So we did have a warmer climate once, and it was a great place for honey. So it's
what changed? Sorry, Paula. What changed in terms of that? So when do you think, or if you've when you look back over time, people started to fear honey? Do you have any insights there?
I think it was two things. Partly when Western medicine took over. So you're sort of talking about, when pharmaceutical companies really started to kick in. And in Britain, people used to have a small holding. They would have a few acres of land and they'd have their own beehive and they'd have their own honey. Well, obviously, if people have their own food and they have their own honey, they're not going to buy other people's. So I think that was one part of it, was trying to make people dependent and buy from shops rather than growing their own. And honey was always part of that. And going back to the third, fourth and fifth dimension and the history of bees, the thing that really solidified my belief in this, that bees being fifth dimensional, is I had somebody come on a tour once. I would do bee safaris at the Newt in Somerset. I set up their bee program and I did a bee museum, the Byzantium. And I had this group, and this lady said, oh, is it true? She said, my son came home from school and he's doing history, you know, of dinosaurs, and they had a timeline of history. And she said that he'd told her, that the teachers had told him, that there were periods in history where the bees disappeared, completely disappeared, and then came back again. So through fossils or whatever they, you know, and I haven't really looked into this. And I didn't know that until she mentioned it. And it just made me think, well, the only way they could disappear and come back again is if they are coming from another dimension. And that would make perfect sense. And so maybe the Egyptians and maybe some of the other earlier civilizations that we are now starting to have uncovered, maybe they were living in fifth dimensional realities, and life goes through circles, and you build up, you get to that level, and then there has to be another swing of the pendulum. So maybe, but I don't know. And we'll just have to wait and see.
It's all very fascinating. One thing I did want to touch on, one final thing, was other bee products, right? Because I think a lot in Western cultures, and I kind of grew up with this notion that we kind of think bees make honey and that's it. And then as I've got older, and more wiser, hopefully, I've realized that there's more bee products available to us, and all of these bee products have other health benefits. We've spoke about a few. I think beforehand you mentioned royal jelly. So what other bee products are there available, and what are like a key health benefit or a key use that you would recommend people use them for? And again, similar to honey, I'm imagining quality matters. Do people get these from, again, directly their beekeeper? And maybe like right now they have to do some research to find a local beekeeper. What Where else can they get the products as well if they don't have like a beekeeper on their doorstep as well? So a few things there, but yeah, just kind of like exploring the kind of other bee products, because I know there's a few more, not just honey, although honey is amazing.
Yeah. So propolis is my number one medicinal product from beehives. There's over 10,000 scientific papers showing the medicinal properties of propolis. And it's a gooey, sticky resin that the bees collect from trees. So it's the tree's medicine that the bees collect, mix it with pollen, and then it makes this sticky gum. And you do an alcohol extraction. So where propolis is most commonly used is as a throat spray or droppers with alcohol. You can get it in powdered form. It can be used in skincare and creams. So there's some really great companies, small businesses that will make creams or make potions from propolis. Did I just drop out there? So propolis is amazing. So look for that. And also in Britain, where the bees aren't getting enough nectar, then that is quite a sustainable product to take from the hive. Now, pollen is very popular, and people buy freeze-dried pollen, and they'll buy it in health food shops and they'll put it on their yogurts. Now, pollen is the protein bees need, and that would be a very difficult product to buy sustainably, to be quite honest, and particularly in Britain, because there's just not enough of it. The bees need it. Here, what I'm very excited about is there's an abundance of it. So for the first time, I'm actually collecting pollen now from bees. But pollen has amino acids, it has all the vitamins and minerals, trace elements. It's a really good product. So if you're somewhere, if you go and visit parts of Eastern Europe, former Eastern Europe, where you've got traditional beekeeping, so like Slovenia, Hungary, Romania, Switzerland is really good for pollen. Places where you've got natural agriculture, because obviously if the plants are sprayed, that's going to be in the pollen. So you really want to be careful where you get your pollen from. So that's quite good. But again, we want tiny bits. We tend to have this habit that we think, oh yeah, honey's a great medicine, so I'm going to eat a pound of it a day. It's little and often. You only need half a teaspoon of honey every day, and that will really boost your immune system. With pollen, just wait until you're sick and then just take a bit. Royal jelly, again, royal jelly is so powerful. So just wait until you have a life-threatening condition and then have royal jelly mixed with honey and get the best you can afford. And people say, oh, it's not fair, I can't afford the really expensive royal jelly, so I get some other stuff. Well, it's other stuff. It's not going to be royal jelly. Royal jelly is really difficult to produce. The bees produce small quantities, and they feed all the other bees royal jelly for the first 3 days of their lives. and the queen is only fed royal jelly. So to farm royal jelly, you have to convince the bees they haven't got a queen, and you have a queen rearing factory. And then you're sucking out the royal jelly with pipettes and then freeze drying it. So again, when you see royal jelly on supermarket shelves, it's not going to be royal jelly, and even if it is that fair to the bees? So I think propolis and honey are the ones that you can go for sustainably and you can have every day. If you don't have your own beehives, then really think twice about royal jelly and pollen. And if you don't have your own beehive, think about having a hive, but not buying in bees to populate it. Just put up a home for bees so that all the trees that are being cut down, taking away these homes for the wild bees, you're providing a home for the bees. And if you have a home for the bees in a tree or in a beehive, in a log hive or something more natural, you can then learn from the bees, you can watch them, and they might die out, and then you can harvest the honey, you could harvest the wax, you could harvest the propolis, so just think a bit more differently and sustainably, and work as communities. So support beekeepers. You can sponsor beehives so that you'll get honey from a beekeeper. Send me an email, listen to my podcast, send me a message, and I'll help you. You've given me some good thoughts actually about how I could perhaps help people connect with other beekeepers. But there are beekeepers out there, so just hashtag local honey on social media and see who comes up, and then trust your intuition. Does that beekeeper look like somebody who's matching your values? And and see how you go.
Amazing. Well, we'll link your podcast and all links and social links and LinkedIn and just everything in the show notes. So I'd recommend people go and check them out. Before we wrap up our conversation, Paula, what's one thing that we didn't speak out today when it comes to bees, bee products, and anything related to our conversation that you think is important to leave our audience with today?
I think I did touch on it, but it is the most important thing is, if you really care about bees, actually two things: sow more seeds so we have more wildflowers, native seeds, just have everything with flowers. Stop mowing your lawn so short, let the daisies and the dandelions grow so we can feed all the bees. And then secondly, when you're buying food, buy bee-friendly food. Buy food that hasn't been sprayed, that hasn't been treated with chemical systemic pesticides, and then that will change the agricultural world. If we stop buying their products, they'll stop growing them.
I love that. That goes back to the point I mentioned beforehand in terms of like our values, and actually taking action, on the things that we believe in. So, Paula, thank you so much. I've learned so much about bees and starting to see more actually. So like I knew bees were important for the ecosystem, but actually this kind of more higher consciousness, spiritual kind of aspect and connection with bees is something that I've been awakened to. So for that, I want to thank you. Where do people go if they want to keep in touch and see more of your work?
Okay, so my website is my name, paulacarnell.com, PaulaCarnell.com. So on there, you'll have links to my podcast. I've got a membership. I also do beekeeping courses online and skep making courses. So my website is the place, really, Paula Carnell. With socials, I'm active on Instagram and LinkedIn. So again, Paula Carnell. And the project we're doing here, we're filming a documentary about the bee project here with this community on Cocos Keeling. And you can find that under Golden Bee Productions, which is on Instagram. So, but basically just find my name and then follow me from there.
Excellent, Paula. Well, thank you for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been an absolute joy.
I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Paula Carnell today, as we have been discussing all things bees. I would love to hear from you and what you took away from this episode. Maybe it's not fearing honey anymore, or maybe some of the spiritual and life lessons that we can learn from our little friends. Whatever it is, either way, get in touch with me by leaving a comment under this episode of the podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, or alternatively, you can get in touch with me on any social media platform, your favorite one of choice, at Real Luke Burrows. I look forward to talking to you and sharing the next episode of the podcast with you really, really soon. See you then.